The last normal memory I have is the scent of night-blooming jasmine and the sound of my own laughter. We were at a friend's backyard barbecue, one of those perfect summer evenings where the tiki torches flicker and the music is just loud enough to feel festive. My husband, Mark, was holding court by the grill, a beer in one hand, tongs in the other, telling a story that had everyone roaring. He was always the sun in any social solar system, and I, like everyone else, had always been happy to be a planet in his orbit. He had a charisma that could bend reality, a charm that made you want to believe whatever he was selling. I loved that about him, even when I knew it was dangerous. When it was time to leave, I saw the way he was walking, the slightly too wide gait, the looseness in his posture. "Maybe we should get a cab, honey," I said, my hand on his arm. He just laughed, that big booming laugh that always disarmed me. He pulled me close, his breath warm and beery against my cheek. "Don't be silly, I'm fine, I'm better than fine." His mother, who had been hovering nearby, chimed in, "Oh, let him be, he's just having a good time, a man needs to unwind." She patted his arm, her look of adoration for her son so absolute it left no room for dissent. I was tired, it was easier to give in, it had always been easier to give in. I remember the feeling of the car's leather seats, the familiar rumble of the engine. I remember leaning my head against the cool glass of the passenger window, watching the streetlights blur into long, golden streaks. The last thing I heard was Mark turning up the radio, singing along off-key to a song from our college days. I smiled, and then the world dissolved into a screech of metal and a supernova of shattering glass. My awakening was not a gentle drift into consciousness, but a violent chemical yank out of a deep, dark well. The first thing I registered was the smell, a sterile antiseptic sharpness that scoured my nostrils. Then came the sounds, the rhythmic electronic beep of a machine next to my head and the hushed, serious murmur of voices somewhere beyond my field of vision. I tried to move, to sit up, but my body refused to obey. It was like a telephone line had been cut, the signal from my brain reaching a dead end somewhere in the middle of my back. A wave of panic, cold and immense, washed over me. A doctor came into view, his face kind but etched with a professional gravity that terrified me. He spoke slowly, his words precise and carefully chosen, but they landed on me like hammer blows. "Spinal cord injury, T4 vertebra, complete transection, paralyzed from the waist down." He kept talking about prognoses and therapies, but the only words that echoed in the silent, screaming cavern of my mind were, "You will never walk again." Mark was a wreck. He spent the first few days at my bedside, his face puffy and tear-streaked. He held my hand, his head bowed, and whispered apologies into my knuckles. "I'm a monster," he sobbed. "I did this to you. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you, I swear." His mother, my mother-in-law, was a constant presence, bustling around the room, fluffing my pillows, her face a perfect mask of worried concern. But her eyes, when they landed on me, held a flicker of something else, something cold and appraising. In the fog of pain and medication, I found myself in the absurd position of comforting him, of telling him it wasn't his fault, that it was an accident. The guilt was eating him alive, and even then, even with my life in ruins, my primary instinct was to take care of him. The legal and financial reality of our new life began to intrude on the sterile quiet of the hospital room. It was a clear-cut case. He had been drunk, his blood alcohol level more than twice the legal limit. The other driver was a city bus. The insurance settlement was going to be astronomical. It wasn't a lottery win, it was restitution. It was a monetary value placed on my ability to walk, to run, to dance, to feel the grass beneath my feet. It was the money that would pay for the wheelchairs, the home modifications, the round-the-clock care, the lifetime of medical needs that now stretched before me like a desolate, barren landscape. And that was when everything changed. The shift was subtle at first. Mark's apologies were replaced by discussions of logistics. He and his mother would stand at the foot of my bed, talking over me as if I wasn't there, their voices hushed but excited as they discussed investment strategies and long-term financial planning. They weren't talking about my care, they were talking about our future, a future in which my catastrophic injury was the foundation of a new, prosperous life for them. My mother-in-law began a quiet, insidious campaign. "You must be so overwhelmed, dear," she'd say, patting my arm with a hand that felt like a spider. "All these complex decisions, it's too much for you to handle in your state." Your state, the phrase hung in the air. She started telling the nurses I was confused, that the medication was making me paranoid. She would intercept my friends when they came to visit, whispering to them in the hallway about my fragile emotional state. I was being isolated, my reality being methodically dismantled and replaced with one of her own creation. The final, soul-crushing betrayal came a few weeks later. Mark sat by my bed, his face arranged in an expression of deep, loving concern that he must have practiced in the mirror. His mother stood behind him, a hand on his shoulder, a silent pillar of support. "We need to talk about the settlement, honey," he began, his voice soft and condescending. "It's a huge responsibility, and your mother and we're worried about you, the trauma you've been through. It's affected your judgment. It would be perfectly understandable." I just stared at him, a cold dread coiling in my stomach. We've spoken to a lawyer, he continued, not meeting my eyes. He says that the best thing, the most loving thing to do would be for me to manage the funds for you, to be granted conservatorship over your finances just until you're feeling more like yourself again. He said it so smoothly, so reasonably. He framed it as an act of profound love and protection, but I saw it for what it was, a coup, a hostile takeover of my life. He had crashed the car, broken my body, and now, with the help of his mother, he was going to have me declared legally incompetent so he could steal the only thing I had left, my future. They wanted to be the caretakers of my fortune, a fortune that existed only because of the hell he had put me in. They wanted to control my money, which meant they would control every aspect of my life, from the doctors I saw to the home I lived in. I would be their prisoner, a golden goose with broken wings, completely and utterly at their mercy. I lay there, trapped in a body that wouldn't move, a body that was dependent on them for my most basic needs, and I understood the true nature of the horror I was in. They hadn't just caused the accident, they were going to profit from it. And I was the business they were about to acquire. The hospital room, once a sanctuary for healing, became the cell of my captivity. My physical paralysis was absolute, but the powerlessness I felt went far beyond my nerveless limbs. It was a suffocating, deliberate isolation engineered by the two people I should have been able to trust the most. Mark was my gatekeeper. He helpfully managed my phone, telling me I needed to rest, that the constant calls were too stimulating. He would screen my visitors, telling my closest friends that I was sleeping or too distressed for company. Those who did get through were met with his somber, worried face as he explained that I was having a hard time, that I was prone to fantasies and getting things mixed up. He and his mother were meticulously crafting a narrative for the hospital staff, for our friends, for the world. I was the tragic, brain-damaged victim, my mind as broken as my spine. And they were the selfless, long-suffering caregivers preparing to take on the noble burden of managing my life. They thought I was drowning in a sea of grief and medication, but what they didn't realize was that betrayal is a powerful stimulant. The fog of despair began to burn away, replaced by the cold, clear fire of rage. They had made a critical miscalculation. They had been so focused on my broken body that they had completely forgotten about my mind. I had always been the planner, the strategist in our marriage. I managed the household budget down to the penny. I organized our lives with the precision of a project manager. My mind was my greatest asset, and it was the one part of me they hadn't been able to touch. I knew I couldn't fight them alone. I needed an army, but first I needed to get a message past the castle walls. The opportunity came in the form of a young night nurse named Sarah. I had been observing her for days. Unlike the other nurses who treated me with a kind of pitying distance, Sarah spoke to me like a person. She would tell me about her day, complain about her nursing school exams, and she always looked me directly in the eye as if she could see the person I still was trapped inside the wreckage. One night, when she was checking my vitals, I made my move. I faked a coughing fit, a choking, gasping performance that was terrifyingly convincing. As she leaned over me, her face close to mine, I whispered, my voice hoarse and urgent. Not sick, listen, my sister. Her name is Emily. I need you to call her. Don't use the hospital phone. Tell her it's a code red. Tell her I said to get me a lawyer, the best one, a shark. Sarah's eyes widened, but she didn't question me. She just gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. A few hours later, my sister Emily stormed into the hospital room like a hurricane. She had always been my protector, my fiery, no-nonsense other half. She took one look at my husband and his mother, who were feigning sleep in the visitors' chairs, and her eyes narrowed. What the hell is going on? She demanded. Mark and his mother snapped awake, launching into their well-rehearsed script about my delicate state, but Emily wasn't buying it. She bulldozed past them, came to my bedside, and took my hand. Talk to me, she said, and I did. In a torrent of whispered words, I told her everything. The accident, the settlement, the plot to have me declared incompetent. The chess game began. The lawyer Emily found was a legend, a woman named Annette who specialized in disability rights and was known for eating men like my husband for breakfast. Annette's first visit was clandestine. She arrived disguised as a specialist in spiritual counseling, her briefcase full of legal documents hidden beneath pamphlets on meditation. I laid out the story, my voice weak but my mind sharp. Annette listened, her expression growing harder and colder with every word. This isn't just a conservatorship attempt, she said, her voice a low, dangerous growl. This is conspiracy to commit fraud. They're not just trying to control you, they're trying to steal from you. My counteroffensive started immediately, though on the surface nothing changed. To Mark and his mother, I began to play the part they had written for me. I became more passive, more confused. I would ask the same questions over and over. I would cry at odd moments. I let them believe their campaign of gaslighting was working, that my will was eroding. They grew confident, careless. While they were congratulating themselves, I was secretly building my arsenal. Emily smuggled in a tiny, voice-activated digital recorder, the kind journalists use. I would hide it under my blanket, and it became my silent, secret witness. I recorded everything. I recorded my mother-in-law telling Mark that the first thing they should do with the money is buy a new car, a safe one. I recorded Mark laughing as he described how easy it would be to get the judge to sign off on the incompetency, because who's going to believe a hysterical cripple? Every condescending remark, every whispered plan, every casual admission of their true motives was captured. The court, at Annette's insistence, ordered an independent psychiatric evaluation. This was the moment their entire case rested on. They spent days prepping me, coaching me on what to say, reminding me not to get agitated. They told the psychiatrist before he even entered the room that I was deeply traumatized and delusional. They thought they had him in their pocket, but I was more prepared than they could ever imagine. When Dr. Alastair sat down with me, I didn't present as a victim. I presented as a client briefing her lawyer. I was calm, articulate, and rational. I laid out the timeline of events from the accident to their conservatorship plot. I explained the logic behind their actions. I wasn't paranoid. I was a woman who had correctly identified a threat. I could see the shift in his eyes as I spoke. He had come in expecting to evaluate a broken mind, but he had found a brilliant one. He realized he wasn't there to assess my competence. He was there to witness my testimony. His report, I knew, would be a bombshell. The day I was finally transferred to a specialized rehabilitation facility was a victory. Annette had fought for it, arguing that the hospital, under Mark's influence, was a toxic environment. As the paramedics wheeled me out, I saw the look of panic on my husband's face. He was losing control. He had trapped me in that room for weeks, but I was the one who had been setting a trap of my own. I had my team. I had my evidence. And I had a fire in my belly that was about to burn their world to the ground. The rehabilitation facility was like being able to breathe after weeks of being held underwater. For the first time since the accident, I was surrounded by people whose sole mission was to help me, not control me. My husband's visits became less frequent, his influence waning. The narrative he and his mother had so carefully constructed had no power here. Here I wasn't a hysterical cripple. I was a patient, a client, a fighter. The work was brutal. Physical therapy was a daily exercise in confronting the absolute, unyielding reality of my paralysis. But every small victory, every inch of progress in regaining strength in my upper body, fueled my resolve. I wasn't just fighting to get stronger, I was training for war. The incompetency hearing was scheduled in a small, sterile courtroom that felt more like a conference room. I was wheeled in by my sister, feeling a strange mixture of terror and exhilarating focus. Mark and his mother were already there, sitting with their lawyer. They looked confident, relaxed. They still believed this was a formality. Their lawyer opened, painting a masterful picture of tragedy. He spoke of my devastating injuries, the emotional trauma, the understandable cognitive fog that had descended upon me. He called my mother-in-law to the stand. She was brilliant. She wept, her voice choked with emotion as she described my supposed confusion, my memory lapses, my paranoid delusions about them being after my money. She was the very image of a heartbroken mother, desperate to protect her family. Then my husband took the stand. He was even better. His face was a mask of noble suffering. He spoke of his undying love for me, his crushing guilt over the accident, and his solemn vow to dedicate his life to my care. "This isn't about the money," he said, looking the judge directly in the eye, his own eyes welling with tears. "This is about protecting the woman I love from a burden she is in no condition to bear." It was a sickeningly perfect performance. I could see the judge, a kind-faced older woman, looking at him with sympathy. For a moment even I felt a flicker of doubt. But then my lawyer Annette stood up to begin her cross-examination, and the temperature in the room dropped by 20 degrees. "You say this isn't about the money," Annette began, her voice deceptively gentle. "So you must have been saving for your future together, building a nest egg." "Of course," Mark said proudly. "I've always been the provider." "Excellent," Annette said, and then she turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to play a short audio recording." She placed a small digital recorder on the table. The first voice that filled the silent courtroom was my mother-in-law's, sharp and clear. "The first thing we should buy is a new lake house, the one with the big deck. We can tell people it's for her, for accessibility." The second voice was Mark's, laughing. "Slow down, Mom. We have to get the money first. Don't worry, she's too out of it to notice anything. She still thinks I'm the good guy." The color drained from Mark's face. His mother looked like she had been turned to stone. Annette let the silence hang in the air for a moment before continuing. She played another recording, this one of Mark mocking me to his mother, calling me his golden ticket. With every recording, his and his mother's carefully constructed facade of loving caregivers crumbled into dust, revealing the greedy, cruel gargoyles beneath. Then it was my turn. As my sister wheeled me to the witness stand, I could feel their hatred radiating across the room. I was no longer a confused victim in their eyes, I was the architect of their humiliation. I took the oath, my voice clear and steady. I didn't need notes, I just needed the truth. I told the court everything. I started with the barbecue, with him insisting on driving drunk. I described the crash, the hospital, the moment the doctor told me I would never walk again. And then, looking directly at my husband, I told the court about his plot. I detailed every lie, every act of manipulation, every condescending word. "My husband did not just cause the accident that broke my body," I said, my voice ringing with a power I didn't know I possessed. He used my paralysis as an opportunity. He saw my brokenness not as a tragedy to be mourned, but as a business venture to be exploited. He tried to convince me in this court that my mind was as broken as my spine. He is wrong. I turned to the judge. Your Honor, I may have lost the use of my legs, but I have not lost the use of my mind, my voice, or my will to fight for my own life. The final blow came when Anik called the court-appointed psychiatrist to the stand. His testimony was devastating for their case. He declared me to be not only legally competent, but possessing a remarkable degree of lucidity and resilience in the face of extreme physical and emotional trauma. And then, Anik delivered the coup de grace. Your Honor, she announced, in light of the evidence of financial and emotional abuse presented today, my client is not only opposing this fraudulent conservatorship petition, but she is also filing for an immediate divorce. Furthermore, we are filing a separate civil suit against Mr. Mark's last name personally. The insurance settlement is restitution for the catastrophic injuries he inflicted upon my client through his criminal negligence. It was never their money. It was and is her compensation, and we intend to prove that he owes her far more than that. Mark stared at me, his mouth agape. The mask was gone. All that was left was the raw, ugly face of a man who had just been completely and utterly outplayed. He hadn't just lost the money, he had lost everything. And in that moment, sitting in my wheelchair, unable to feel anything from the waist down, I had never felt more powerful in my entire life. The judge's ruling was not just a denial of their petition, it was a verbal demolition. She looked at my husband and his mother with a look of such profound disgust that they both seemed to shrink in their chairs. She called their actions a monstrous and predatory abuse of trust, and openly stated that if it were within her power in that courtroom, she would be recommending criminal charges. The conservatorship was denied with extreme prejudice, a legal term that meant they could never, ever try something like this again. The divorce was a swift, brutal affair. Faced with the mountain of evidence and the threat of the civil suit, Mark had no leverage. He was forced to sign whatever we put in front of him. He walked away from our marriage with nothing but his clothes and a staggering amount of debt from his own legal fees. The civil suit was settled out of court. His insurance company, eager to avoid a public trial with a jury that would be overwhelmingly sympathetic to my story, paid out an additional sum that ensured a significant portion of his future earnings would be garnished for the next 20 years. He was financially tethered to the woman he had tried to destroy. The first thing I did with my freedom and my settlement was build a fortress. I bought a beautiful, single-story house on a quiet, tree-lined street and had it completely retrofitted to be my perfect, accessible sanctuary. Wide doorways, a roll-in shower, a kitchen with counters I could work at from my chair. Every detail was designed not as a concession to my disability, but as a celebration of my independence. The process of rehabilitation was long and grueling. There were days of excruciating pain and soul-crushing frustration. But for every moment of despair, there was a moment of triumph. The first time I could transfer myself from my chair to my bed without assistance, the first time I drove my own specially equipped van, the first time I cooked a full meal in my new kitchen. Each small act was a reclamation of the life they had tried to steal from me, but I quickly realized that having a safe home and financial security wasn't enough. My experience had opened my eyes to a dark world I never knew existed, a world where the most vulnerable are often preyed upon by the people who are supposed to protect them. The anger I felt towards my ex-husband and his mother began to transform into something more constructive, a purpose. I enrolled in online courses, first in finance and then in law. I became an expert in conservatorship law and disability rights. I learned the language of the system that had almost crushed me so I could dismantle it for others. With a significant portion of my settlement, I established the Phoenix Foundation. Our mission was simple: to provide free legal and financial advocacy services to victims of catastrophic accidents and people with disabilities who were facing exploitation. We became a team of sharks, fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. We exposed abusive guardians, overturned fraudulent conservatorships, and empowered people to take back control of their own lives. My life found a new rhythm. My days were filled with work, with strategy sessions, with phone calls to clients who were in the same dark place I had once been. I gave them hope, but more importantly, I gave them a voice and a weapon. I never saw my ex-husband again, but I heard through the grapevine that he was a broken man, living a meager life, haunted by the monthly checks that were a constant reminder of what he had done. His mother became a recluse, shamed into silence. They had sought a fortune and had ended up with nothing but their own miserable company. The story ends not in a courtroom, but in a crowded university auditorium. I was invited to be the keynote speaker at a conference on disability advocacy. As my sister wheeled me onto the stage, I felt a familiar tremor of nerves, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of calm purpose. I looked out at the sea of faces, students, lawyers, activists, people in wheelchairs like me, and I told them my story. I spoke of the accident, the betrayal, and the fight. They tried to declare me incompetent, I said, my voice filling the hall. They tried to silence me. They underestimated the power of a woman with nothing left to lose. But in taking everything, they gave me a new kind of strength. They took my ability to walk, but they gave me a reason to stand up and fight. My body is broken, but my spirit is not. And my voice, I said, leaning into the microphone, my voice is just getting started. The applause was deafening. It was the sound of understanding, of solidarity, of hope. In that moment, I was not a victim. I was not a patient. I was a survivor, a warrior, and the master of my own fate. Thanks listening this story. Now I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. Share this story with your friends and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to Revenge Laura for more episodes.